Thank you, Owen, and thank you everyone for coming. So I recognize a couple of the names in the list there. Hello to a couple of former Google people. So this is me. This is what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to talk to you about UX. I run a user experience agency. Most UX agencies do research on behalf of other companies. My company is slightly different. We create tools for research. We build UX labs, we build design centers, we build hardware and software for research. But I'm not advertising here. I'm not here to sell you anything, because we don't sell things through AV teams. We sell things to research teams. But I'm here because I did work in AV for a very long time. So I've been running my company for around 5 years now. Prior to that, I worked in user experience at Google for a number of years. And prior to that, I worked in AV at Google. So I used to work on the AV team globally there. Excuse me. Prior to Google, I worked at Goldman Sachs, Electrosonic in the UK government, various other AV related jobs and roles. And before that, I was a theatre technician. So I'm a crossover of UX and AV. And because of that, I'm on the AVIXA standards committee at the moment, and we're writing the standard for user experience design for audiovisual systems, which we're hoping to have a draft out in the next few months, but we'll keep your eyes out for that. So in preparing for this talk, I've been out of the AV world for quite a number of years now. So I wanted to figure out what's going on now in UX in AV. When I left the AV world, user experience wasn't really a thing. There weren't people working in UX. There weren't researchers employed by in-house teams or by manufacturers or developers. So I did some Googling, and I looked around, and I went on LinkedIn and on Google and searched for people, and all I found was me. I was the only result, no matter what I searched for. I just get myself. And this was in an incognito window. This wasn't me finding me because I'm me. No matter what I did, I couldn't find anyone in the AV world who works in UX. I managed to find one person at Crestron whose job title was head of UX. She was there less than a year and left and went back into a digital industry. So why am I the only result? Why aren't there people in the AV world working, specializing in UX, like there are in almost all other industries now? What's going on? So I'm going to talk to you about these things today. I'm going to talk to you about why this matters to you, why user experience matters. Go through a few definitions, talk about the process, and then give you some AV-related advice. And then I'll stay around at the end for questions. As Owen said, drop any questions into the chat. So why does user-centered design matter? Think of a company like Uber, big global tech company. They're a big technology firm, right? They're a multi-billion-dollar global company, and they've taken over the transport world, the taxi world, the cab world. And they've done it with these technologies. This is the technology they rely on. But this big global tech firm didn't invent taxis or phones or any of these things. None of it was a big innovation. So what did Uber do? How did they take over their entire industry? They did it by changing the user experience of traveling somewhere. They realized people don't want a taxi. They don't want a minicab. They want to be somewhere else. Their goal is to be over there. And I'm going to talk a lot about goals and user needs in this talk. So these other companies are all giant companies that have done the same thing. They've gone into an existing industry, created a better user experience. They haven't brought any radical new technology. They've changed the user experience, and they've taken over the entire industry. This will happen in AV. It has to. So let's go through a few definitions here. First is the process itself, the user-centered design process. What is it? What it isn't is a bit of UX. It isn't that you take how we work now. You don't go, well, we do this now, and we're going to tack on a little bit of UX on the end. That's pointless. That does not work. It is about fundamentally changing the process of how things are designed, of how the design team, the engineering team, think about building things. So what it's not about is the color of a button or designing a user interface or testing something that's finished. Those are all small parts of it, but that isn't the process. Those things matter to a degree, but what really matters is talking to users. And you're going to get very bored of me in the next 30 minutes repeating that phrase, because if you walk away from this talk with one thing in your mind, it's going to be that you need to talk to users. And the reason I'm being quite brutish about that is so few people who design and build things ever see a user using the thing. It is really rare. Even in companies that are very user focused, that are very good at UX. Even when I worked at Google, the vast majority of engineers who sat writing code hardly ever or never saw a person using the thing that they were writing. There was this abstraction between the people that build the thing and the people that use it, as if they're somehow never the twain shall they intermix. And it's ridiculous. You must talk to your users. The other thing that user-centered design is about is focusing on the overall experience. Let's say we're designing a training room in a university or in an office. The people in this talk, in this AV user group, focus on the audiovisual side. But to the user, that doesn't matter. The user doesn't enter that room with the goal of, I will use an AV system. No one wakes up in the morning and says, I will use an AV system. They have a goal to achieve and they have a thing they want to do. In a training room, it might be, I will give some training. I will give a lecture. On the other side, it might be a student thinking, my goal is to learn. It is to gain knowledge. But none of the goals are to use a tool. A tool is a way of achieving that. So you have to focus on the overall experience of using the thing. And the thing isn't just the AV system, it's everything. And the other thing that's very important in this process is iteration. It's changing what you do. It's not being stuck on a design train of we design a thing, then we build it, then we deploy it, then we do. You have to be willing to go around and change things and accept errors and accept learning and change. Definition here of two concepts of design. There are two main, no matter what you're designing, there are two main ways of doing it. You can take an engineering approach or you can take a user approach. And I think at the moment, the AV world is very engineer-led. Experts sit in a room and design something because they know. They've been in the industry for a long time. They know how a training room works. They know how to build one because they built 50. They know, they're certain. I can say this because this was me. Before going to Google and before learning the concepts behind UX, then before going off to university and doing a master's degree in it, that was me. When I designed a new thing, I would sit down with a pen and paper and start designing it. And only further, way down the line, when it was way too late, did I think about people. Now I design things completely the other way. So an engineer-led approach looks at what can we do? So you start with limitations. You start saying, well, we're able to do this. So whatever we end up doing has to be within this frame. We've got these boxes, we've got these systems, and it has to be within that. Focuses on equipment, and it's quite backwards looking in that it focuses on what have we done, and let's build on it a bit. A user-led approach is exactly the opposite. Instead of starting with this box of tricks and box of things we can do, you start with anything is possible. What do our users need? What are they trying to achieve? How do we help them to achieve it? And you work backwards towards the technology. You're going to end up designing something, but you don't start with designing something. Instead of focusing on boxes and equipment, you focus on the goals of your users and you look forwards to what do they need in the future, not what did they need yesterday. An important distinction here between usability testing and user research. And the reason I'm making this distinction is a lot of people think that doing UX means we've built something, we've designed it, let's test it on people. And that's important. Usability testing is a very important part of the process. But to do that, you have to be quite specific. You have to have a thing. You have to have a pen that sat on my desk. I can take a pen and I can go and test it. I can get people to write with it. I can get people to draw pictures. I can set them tasks and I can evaluate the thing I've made. So this is referred to as evaluative research. And it is important, but that isn't UX. That isn't the user-centered process. User research is much more general and big and open-ended. So instead of starting with a pen, we might ignore pens and we might go and talk to people who write, which is almost everyone. And we might go and talk to people about why they write. How do they feel when they write? What inspires them to write? What makes them use a pen over a keyboard or over a phone? What brings them delight? What brings them joy about using a pen when they're using a pen? What's frustrating? What's difficult? So you start big and you narrow down. That is the user-centered process. You start with everything possible and you narrow down, and this helps you to generate ideas. If we just start with pens, we're only getting this much information. If we start with everything, we're getting everything and we're not missing all the stuff around. So this helps you to generate ideas. So this is referred to as generative research. Quantitative, qualitative, quantity, quality, numbers, people, essentially. So quantitative is about data, spreadsheets, surveys, A/B testing, something I can put into a database and get information out. And this is important. This is all about the numbers behind things, and we can gather metrics. In the AV world, you can gather usage statistics. You can send out surveys and get information that way. There are lots of ways you can fill up spreadsheets, but what do you do with it? Those numbers are a proxy for something. And often people think those numbers are a proxy for how good something is. And they can be, but they can also be extremely misleading. This is why qualitative research, talking to people, interviewing people, getting information about feelings, about usage is important. So qualitative research is about interviewing people and talking to people. And this is about why. So an example here, a lot of you will remember in the 90s, a lot of websites had landing pages. You'd go to Yahoo, and before you could search for anything, you get a page saying, "Welcome to Yahoo, we are a search engine, click here." And you'd click OK. And then you had load Yahoo. Annoying, they went away quickly. But if we just looked at quantitative data and we work at Yahoo and we say, let's just take a look at usage stats. And if there's anything people aren't using, we'll look into why they're not using it. And does it need improving? Does it need to go away? Are we in the wrong area? So we look at our spreadsheet of all of our individual pages. And the number one most used page is the landing page. Wow. We had 1 million visitors last month, and every single one of them went to this page. They must love it. Don't touch that page. Whoa. We could take 5 of those users, bring them into our lab and talk to them. And I think we'd quickly learn that that page is utterly useless and it needs to go away. And we did learn it and they did go away. Very few landing pages exist anymore like that. My last definition for you is of user error. You often hear this in the AV world, in lots of other engineering worlds. Oh, that's just user error. Oh, the user did it wrong. So the definition is there is no such thing as user error. I cannot express this enough. If a user is trying to achieve something with your system that they can reasonably expect to achieve and it goes wrong, it is never their fault. It is the fault of the system. It is the fault of the design. It is the fault of the design team. It is not the user's fault, ever. If they come into your training room and they try and bake a souffle with it, yes, that's an error of understanding. But if they come into your training room and they try to show a movie or do a presentation and they can't do it, that's not their error. So some basic definitions there, some basic background. Now let's talk about the process. And the important thing is it's a process. So let's look at another type of process, a waterfall development process. A lot of people will know this terminology. In a waterfall process, one thing follows the other. Water falls down the hill. So we start with requirements. And I've written here from client. All of you are from in-house teams, presumably. So your clients are likely to be stakeholders or teams within your companies, but your requirements come from somewhere. Do they come from users? Do you start by talking to real users of your systems? You may do. I've never seen it in the AV world. If I'm wrong, tell me. I'll give you my details at the end. I'd love to discuss it. So we start with requirements, and then this happens. Engineers come in, just like I used to do before I changed how I work. And we design it, we build it, we install it, and we support it in various ways. And we're back on that design train I talked about. We're on a track and there's no going back. We've done one thing, now we're doing the next, now we're doing the next. We've got deadlines, we've got to finish. So we're going down this line. I don't think good things get built this way. I think good things get built by starting with user needs. And everything only comes from user needs. And you must be willing to accept that you do not know. No matter how long you've been doing this, no matter how experienced you are, you do not know. because there are no experts in users. There's no such thing. If anyone ever tells you they're an expert in users, be very wary of that person, because no one can be. You can be an expert in getting information from users. You can be an expert in learning from them, in gathering insights. You can't be an expert in actual users or in user behavior. It's just not possible. So this is a waterfall process. There are lots of other ways of describing different development processes. What's the user-centered process? There are lots of ways of drawing it, but this is my favorite. A lot of the same ideas, a lot of the same words, but we start with research. Everything comes from talking to users. Must be 7 or 8 times I've said it already. Talk to your users. We start there, and then we design something. But these arrows signify that we can look back. We can go back and do more research on our design. We could build an extremely simple prototype. The simplest prototype is a description. You can go back to users with a description of your ideas and get information about it. Or you can draw it. Let's say we're designing our training room. We're going to need an interface of some kind. We're going to have a panel or something. We can just get a pen and paper and draw it and do a paper prototype and test that. Quick, iterative research, quick, iterative design. Don't build a real thing and then test it. Build the simplest, lowest fidelity model and test that. So this is a way of encapsulating the user-centered design process. We're always going round and round. And we're always improving on this process, this project, this thing we're doing, this training room we're building. We design an element of it, we quickly test it on real users and get feedback and get information and get insights, and we build on that. So let's say you're believing me, you're convinced. The AV world can learn from other industries and other ways of working, and you can start to be more user-focused in your processes. What do? The first thing you need is to think about people, because you've got people on your teams and they will need to change how they conceptualize design. They will need to understand that they do not know. It's the idea from Socrates, I know that I do not know. But you'll need new people as well. You'll need experts. There aren't experts in users, but there are experts in user research and user research design. So a UX researcher and a UX designer, how do they differ? A researcher talks to your users. This may be they literally go and sit and talk to them, interview them, perform tasks, do usability testing, or it may be that they manage the processes. It might be they hire other people to do it, get agencies in or freelancers. It might be that they write surveys, but all of it is about talking to users and collecting insights. And an insight is anything you learn that informs a design decision. And that may be something new you learn. It could be you do a lot of research and a lot of talking to users, and you learn entirely new things. Or it could be that you learn that what you're doing in some areas is right, but that's also an insight. It's also very important to learn, to back up the assumptions you've made. It has to be done through research. So the user researcher determines the needs, and then the UX designer turns those insights and those user needs into a structural design. And what I mean by structural design, they don't sit on Illustrator or Figma or Photoshop or something and design things. They convert the concepts of the ideas into real things that you need to implement. So they'll work with your engineering team, they'll work with your PMs, and they'll say, this is what we need to get to. We need to achieve these things. Our users have these goals and we need to help them to do them. So they implement the user needs. The rest of your team needs to buy into this. The rest of your team at every level has to accept that you're now user-focused, and they have to engage with users in some way. Some people engage directly with the users themselves, some people with the data, some people with the insights, but everyone has to accept we are user-focused and this is how we work. Here's a car and a horse, and I'm showing you this silly picture because of this quote. This gets attributed to Henry Ford. It almost certainly wasn't by Henry Ford, but it's still very useful and indicative. If I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. This takes us on to the concept of goal-oriented users, goal-oriented design. If a user has a horse and they use it to get around, they don't need the horse. So what I've said about people not needing tools, What they need is to be over there for some other reason. So they need the horse gets them from A to B. So their goal is to be at B. It isn't to use a horse. So when they get there, there's a reason they're there. They haven't gone there for no reason. So they also have the goal of doing something, going to a party, celebrating a birthday, giving a present, delivering something. There are these other goals. But then on top of those, if they're going there for a party, the goal could be to bring joy to my family. So there are, and we can go deeper and deeper. So we can look at the many layers of goals that the users have that we help them to achieve by giving them a horse. If we just have our engineering heads on of it's a horse, we miss all of the nuance of why are people using them. Back to our imaginary training room. If we just think we're building a training room, plug some boxes together and stick them on a projector, we're missing the nuance of why are people using it? What are they trying to achieve? How can we better help them to achieve it? And this quote gets to the heart of the idea that you can't ask people what they want. No one really knows what they want. They know what they want to achieve, but they don't know what they want. So if all you have is a horse and you can't conceptualize of anything else, you're going to ask for a faster horse to get you from A to B faster. If you don't know there's this metal box with wheels and an engine that will do the job, you can't ask for it. So talking to users is very difficult. I don't want you to go away from this talk thinking it's easy. Starting doing it is easy and quick. Learning how to do it properly is difficult, but I'll give you more advice further down on how to do that. So here's something that was designed. Someone sat on CAD or with pen and paper and they drew a big square and said, put grass on it, we've got a big green square. And what a beautiful big green square it is. But it isn't. It's two big triangles. And it's two big triangles because those pesky users turned up. Oh, that's so annoying. They came and they walked straight across the middle. And they did it again and again and again. And look, they've left this annoying line through the middle. Isn't it annoying? The person who designed this didn't do any research, I don't think. If they did, they could well have learned that users of this square didn't need a big green square. They needed to be on the other side of it in that direction from this corner to that corner. And we clearly see that that's the case. They could have built a path. They could have built something entirely different, but they still built their big square. So this gets to the idea that users will do what they need to do. So this is referred to as a desire line. And a desire line is anything in any system that shows how people use it in an unintended way. So here it's a literal line that people have left with their feet. In our imaginary training room, it might be, we come in one day and someone's pulled a load of cables out from behind a screen and plugged an Xbox in. That's a desire line, plugging that in, and it shows that there's something they needed to do that we didn't conceptualize. The more research you do, the more you learn, the fewer desire lines you find later further down the line, because you are learning what people actually need. You're not the engineer designing a green square. You're the clever engineers learning from your users and designing two triangles. So that's a very brief overview of the user-centered design process, extremely brief, but there are ways you can learn a lot more. So let's take some real examples. So I went on Google and I searched for meeting room control panel UI, and I picked the first 6 that came up that were good enough quality to show here. So a very basic methodology to find these 6. I don't know where they came from. As far as I'm aware, they're real interfaces in use somewhere. I think they're pretty representative of what we see in the real world, in the real AV world, on Crestron panels and AMX and Extron, things like that. Maybe you disagree, I don't know. Are these good? Are these not good? Are they usable? Could they be improved on? You can't look at things and just say if they're good or bad. I have my opinion, I have my opinions about these, but my opinions do not matter. I'm Socrates, I know that I don't know. So looking at these, I can't say whether they're good or bad for users because no one is an expert in users. But what can we do? How can we investigate it? The main thing we can do is go and test them on users and talk to users about them. But before we even do that, there are other methods. So there's such a thing as a design system. Many of you will know about these, you will have heard of them, but I'll give you just a 30-second overview. A design system is a set of guidelines. It's a set of basic principles of how to build things. It's not just a folder on a laptop full of icons. It's things like this. This is Google's design system called Material Design. And if any of you have an Android phone, or if any of you use Google systems, they are almost all obeying the principles from Material Design. And it gives guidelines and principles and foundations, and it guides you in how to make things. There are ones available from other companies. There's this one from Atlassian, who make education software. There are lots of them available. Does anyone in the AV world use these systems? Not even one specific for AV. Do they just use these? I don't think they do. Maybe they do. Maybe I'm a few years out of the industry, like I said, but I couldn't find any examples of it. I did try quite hard and I couldn't find anything. Another thing we can do is there's a thing called a heuristic, and a heuristic is a guiding principle. It's a very basic idea that we should follow. So a heuristic in life might be, we should be nice to people, or we shouldn't murder people. And they're very basic fundamental things. These are the 10 usability heuristics, and these are 25, 30 years old. Originally written by Jakob Nielsen, who now runs the Nielsen Norman Group. You can learn a lot more about the history of these at that URL on the page. So this is the most basic set of usability heuristics. The first one is visibility of system status. And the first sentence of that, the design should always keep users informed about what is going on. So this is the most basic thing that anything digital, anything on an interface should be doing. So we can test it. We can go back to our AV panels and we can pick one. We can pick the Blu-ray at the bottom corner. And I can take the most basic heuristic, the first half of the first sentence, and see how it applies here. So I'm going to do a 60-second heuristic evaluation. So I'll start on my left, display, on, off, mute. What's it telling me? Is it keeping me as a user informed? I think a display can either be on or off if we include standby as an on state. Is it on or off? No idea, not telling me. The word mute is there. Does that mean something is muted? If so, what? Is it audio, video, both? Or is it telling me I can mute? Or is it a call to action saying you should mute? I don't know. On the other side, I see some what look like volume controls and it says the word volume. But I see one at the bottom that's a speaker with a line through it. And that, to me, in common usage, means audio mute. So is the audio off or is it on? I don't know. If I press that button, will something change? Will it mute or will it unmute? There's a volume slider bar that looks like it's at 50% roughly. So is it muted but at 50% or is it not muted and on? I don't know. It is not keeping me informed about what is going on. Last one, the most striking thing on the page to me is a big red button that says power down. Is the power down or is the power not down? Is it a button? Is it an information panel? Is it a call to action? I just don't know. It's not keeping me informed about what is going on. We can do the same for all of these. And I have done very briefly. They don't do too well. They don't come out too well through a heuristic evaluation, which makes me suspect if I go and show these to users and test them, they're not going to score too well. We're going to learn a lot of ways to improve them, but that's good. It's good when you take things to users and learn things. You can change, you can iterate, you can improve. This is the process. This is the point of it. How can design evolve? How can design change? Most of you, all of you have probably seen a version of this remote. It's shipped with most Samsung screens for as long as I can remember. This to me looks very engineering. It's got all the functions crammed in. It isn't really foregrounding very much, saying these are the more important things. Yeah, the volume and what looks like program are slightly bigger, but there's loads of other buttons on there that I don't think get used too much. I think this is an engineer's remote. And for many years, all Samsung commercial and domestic screens came with something like this. Recently, all Samsung screens ship with one of these. At least the domestic screens do. I don't know about commercial these days. I think what you're seeing here in these two remotes is the difference between an engineer-led approach and a user-led approach. I think Samsung took that remote to users, learned how to improve it, and what they came out with was the other one. You actually get both of them with screens these days. It's strange. So think about AV systems. Think about those panels we just saw. Which of these concepts, the engineering remote or the user remote, are these panels closer to? Barco Virtual Classroom, released by Barco last year sometime. I'm not sure exactly when, maybe Q1, Q2, so maybe a year old, I don't know. This is Barco's attempt to address the change in learning, the shift towards remote learning, partly through the crazy world we're living in and COVID, but partly just through more remote learning is just happening generally. And what they say about it is this. They say it's close to the in-class experience, it's engaging and interactive. Who are the users here? Let's identify our users. I see a professor or teacher or someone giving a talk of some kind, and I see maybe 20 or 30 students. The students are sat at home somewhere on a laptop, presumably with headphones on, some without, some in their offices, but that's how they're interacting. That's their experience. The tutor's standing up. Now, let's say you've spent $1 million on this. You've paid Barco, they've come in, they've built this, they're running it for you, you're very happy. Is it engaging and interactive? Is it any more engaging and interactive than a week ago before you had it? So a week ago, the professor was sitting down, everyone else was still in exactly the same state, as far as I can tell, still at home, still on their laptops, still with headphones on. You spent your $1 million, what has changed for them? I don't think very much, if anything, has changed. I could be wrong, I could be misunderstanding the system. The point I'm trying to make is, you've spent your $1 million on this, trying to improve. You've got the best of intentions, you're trying to improve the user experience of your students. Take that $1 million, spend 1/10 of it on research, spend 100th of it on research, on user research, on finding out what do those 20 or 30 people actually need to improve the process, to improve the experience. I think that you wouldn't end up building this if you did that. I could be wrong because I don't know until we do the research, but I do strongly suspect it. I have a hypothesis. We can test my hypothesis. We can go and do research. I'm not here to attack Barco or any other companies. I applaud Barco. They're trying to make a change. They're trying to improve the experience. I just don't think this is the way to do it. So let's say I'm convincing you. Oh, this is great. We need to change our processes. We need to be much more user focused. We need to hire people. We need to do this. What do we do? What do you do straight away? The first thing is, how do you start talking to users? You talk to any users you can to begin with. You don't need anyone you can who are real users of your systems. And when you talk to them, you need to learn how to talk to people. And that sounds silly. We all think we're good at talking to people. We're good at chatting to people. We're not necessarily good at getting insightful, usable information out of people. So a few basic tips here. When you talk to people, talk about real things, real scenarios. Don't ask them, would you, could you? People are bad at saying what they would or could do, because in general, we default to not knowing. So we go, yeah, I guess so. That's proven time and again through lots of academic research that people are very bad at imagining scenarios. So in our training room that we're all building together, if I was starting out on the user research and how are we going to build a training room, I wouldn't sit someone down and say, if we built a training room with 3 projectors, would you use them? Because they don't know. So they're just going to go, yeah, I guess so, yeah. What I would do is I'd start down and say, think about the last time you were giving training to people. Tell me about it. What did you do? Where were you? How did it feel? What frustrated you? What was good about it? What technology were you using? Oh, you were using a projector. Okay, and how did you connect to that projector? Oh, can you draw a diagram for me of the room? Oh, interesting. Real scenarios from their memory. People are good at remembering. People are bad at imagining. Keep questions simple. You heard how I was doing that talk then. You wouldn't ask all those questions in one go. You'd ask one simple question and let them talk, let them tell you things, let them meander. Then ask another simple question and let them go again, and another simple question. Don't ask multi-part questions, ask series of simple questions. And keep things very open-ended. at least to begin with. You notice I started with, let's talk about when you gave some training. I didn't even talk about training rooms, just the concept of training. And then you narrow down to much more specifically what you want to be talking about. So let's say I am convincing you. You need to convince other people. There's going to be a cost of doing this. There's going to be a cost of retraining people. There's going to be a cost of hiring new people. There's going to be a cost of spending more time designing things because the user-centered process does take longer. So one way to convince people is talking about ROI. And one very striking thing that's held up very strongly in academic research is the more user-centered a system is in its design, the longer people use it. So people don't tend to use things that are really technological and good for long times unless they are good to use. So you start designing your systems now in a more user-centered way, they'll last longer. It'll save you money in the medium to long term. It's a pretty good argument for your bosses to sign a check. Happy users need less help. It's again, this is demonstrable. Less help, fewer people, fewer training sessions, fewer maintenance issues. And you get a reduced maintenance cost because people aren't going into our new training room and ripping cables out. And then overall, you save time and money by using a user-centered design process, but you have to invest more upfront. People often ask this, whenever I give talks like this in different industries, people always ask, how do we find users? Where do we find them? So the first thing is identify real users of your systems. So in our imaginary training room, we have to sit down and think, who are the users of this? There are the people giving training, and there are many types of those. So there's several user types. There are the people receiving training, several types of those. There are the technicians who maintain the space, they are users. There are various other people who come in and interact with it in different ways. So we draw up our lists, then we start talking to those people and we will learn about more users from them. We have to accept that we don't even know who the users are to begin with. Find ways to contact them. And by this, I mean, in our training room, it might be that there are mailing lists for teachers, mailing lists for students, mailing lists for trainers at companies. Contact people through those means. In the broader world, there may be industry bodies, there may be other types of groups. If I needed AV people, I might come to Owen and say, can I get access to your users? Can I send them a message saying, we're going to pay you to be in user research? Then you find inventive ways. Go to where there are training rooms, stick posters up saying, we'll give you $50 to come and talk to us for an hour, things like that. And this leads me on to my last point. Pay every single user you ever talk to. Even if they're people you know, they're people on your team, pay them in some way. If they're people you're bringing in from the outside, if you're recruiting random people in a way, through an agency or through other means, pay them in cash, pay them in vouchers. If it's people you know, pay them in other ways. When I was at Google, we would, in all of our UX labs, I kept drawers and safes full of vouchers, Play Store vouchers, Apple vouchers, and drawers full of plushy toys. So that when we were doing research on internal people, which we did a lot, we wouldn't be giving them the $200 or $300 we'd give external people, but we might give them an Android plushie toy, or we might give them a Google mug or things like this. Give them something. And the reason to give them something is twofold. One, paid participants are better participants. They're not doing you a favor. They're not your mate Claire or your mate Bob who's come in to just help you out. They're there to earn something. And you go, here you go, here's a mug. And this mug is payment for what you're going to tell me. And I need to talk to you. And there are issues with that. This is another skill of a researcher, is getting around the problem that you're paying people. But all researchers and all companies pay people, and we all get around these problems. And then the last piece of advice here is keep recruiting people all the time. Build up your database of users, because you're going to be doing a lot of research. You're going to need a lot of people. So those are my kind of quite specific practical steps. But let's say you want to try this. Let's say you're going, okay, this guy Adam, he knows what he's talking about, and he's convinced me we can work in a much more user-centered way. I'm not going to go and hire a researcher straight away. So what can I do? The first thing is accept that you're building an experience. You're not just building an AV system. You're not just making a tool. You're making an experience for everyone who comes into whatever space, whatever system you're building. And that experience is the space, the lighting, the furniture, the floors, the ambience, the feel, the negativity, the joy, and the AV system. It's all of those things. So focus on the entire experience. And this might mean working more closely with other teams. And there may be a lot of politics and problems there, but this is what's needed. Iterate on designs. I can't stress this enough. You have to be willing to learn and iterate and change rapidly and quickly. Prototype, basically, learn quickly. So you need to build this into your timelines. It used to be that last week, someone would come to you and say, oh, we need a training room next week. And you go, oh, quickly make a training room. They need to understand that you work differently now. And you're following a process where they are going to get a much better outcome. And you can guarantee to them that the outcome will be better, but it will take longer. It will take more investment. And you can own the design process. And when I've spoken to AV people about this, I've had a bit of pushback about it. Bring the process of designing things in-house, because you're going to be doing your research in-house. And what's very difficult is for you to do your research and then hand the insights over to someone outside. So don't get AV companies or integrators to do design. Get them to do what they're really good at, which is building stuff, the engineering, plugging boxes, building racks, installing things. Get them to do that work. Don't get them to do what they're bad at, which is user-centered design. They are not good at it. Focus on your teams and getting them to own the design process. And then the last thing is, I know I've talked about hiring people and these big changes you need to make, but if you want to dip your toe in the water, you can get a freelance researcher in for a project. You could bring someone in for 3 months or 6 months to work with your team, work alongside them, and you'll be amazed what you can learn. Bring in good people. Bring in relatively senior, experienced people. What I've seen in the past is companies or teams have wanted to kind of dip their toe in the water. So they've got the most junior person straight out of university. What can you learn from them? You need experienced people. I can help you find people if you want to try this process, but you can bring in a user researcher to help you. So that's almost it from me. There's one more thing I'm going to tell you, and it's what I began with, which is talk to your users. Take that away and do it. If you want to learn a bit more about what I've been talking about, these books are good. I won't go over them now, but these will help you to understand a lot more about the processes I'm talking about, a lot more about the concepts behind design. And the second book will give you a very good idea of how to talk to your users. This is how you can get me. If you have any questions, if you want to talk about anything, you want to tell me I'm wrong about anything, get in touch. And thank you.